Snow had begun to fall in slow, deliberate spirals outside the narrow windows of the Turner family home in suburban Cincinnati. The lights along the street flickered softly, haloed in frost. It was Christmas Eve. Inside other houses, laughter echoed through open windows, holiday songs filled the air, and children's voices rose in delight. But inside the Turners' red brick house, there was no warmth, only the echo of clinking cutlery and a silence heavy enough to smother breath. Emily stood on the porch, holding her youngest son in one arm and balancing a gift bag in the other. Her older son, Lucas, clutched her coat nervously. They had arrived as invited, and yet the door hesitated before opening. It was her mother, Margaret, who answered. Her smile was shallow, absent of its usual spark. Behind her, the hallway was dimly lit and quiet. "You made it," Margaret said, then looked past Emily at the boys, her eyes resting on Ben's little boots, wet from the snow. "We thought you might do something different this year." Emily's heart sank. She had heard the hesitation in her mother's voice on the phone days before. "Are you sure you want to come?" "Yes, Mother, it's Christmas. The boys look forward to it." "It's just... Christine won't be here this time, and your father is tired. We wanted a quieter evening." Emily had smiled then, trying to mask the sting. "We won't be any trouble." But now, standing in the entrance hall, she sensed the truth. They were not welcome. The living room was pristine. Too pristine. The presents under the tree were perfectly arranged, but none bore her sons' names. The table, already set for dinner, stood in painful symmetry. 4 chairs, 4 plates, 4 polished silver forks and knives. There was no space for her children. Emily stared at the table as if she had miscounted. "Where are the other plates?" she asked gently. Her father, Robert, didn't look up from his spot on the sofa. He reached for the remote, turned the volume down on the TV, and finally muttered, "We didn't know if they'd be staying long." It was said in passing, as if it carried no weight. But Emily heard it all. She crouched beside Lucas and Ben, brushed snowflakes from their jackets, and whispered, "Let's go home." Margaret stepped forward. Her voice caught somewhere between apology and avoidance. "Emily, it's just been a stressful year. Your sister's been going through a lot. Your father's had some heart issues. You weren't expecting your daughter," Emily replied quietly, but without trembling. "Or your grandsons." Robert looked up then, his face marked by fatigue or indifference. His eyes met hers just long enough to say what he'd never dare voice aloud, but he said it anyway. "We didn't need more to carry tonight." Emily felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not even pain, but a solemn clarity. She turned without another word, took each of her sons by the hand, and walked back into the cold December night. The air outside bit at their cheeks. Emily fastened the boys into their car seats with the calm efficiency of a nurse in triage. She drove home in silence. When they reached their modest 2-bedroom apartment, Emily made hot cocoa from a powdered packet, tore open a box of pancake mix, and shaped Christmas trees on a frying pan using a spatula and a child's smile as her guide. They laughed. She laughed. But later that night, when the boys were asleep, Emily sat alone on the kitchen floor, holding the gifts they never got to give. And there, in the soft light of a dying candle, she cried, silently, bitterly, because not even on Christmas Eve could her own parents make room for her. She did not cry out of sadness. She cried because something finally broke. And in its place, something else began to grow. A seed of something quiet, unshakable. Not vengeance. Not even resentment, just certainty. The certainty that she was and always had been alone in that family. But what Emily could not know, what she could not possibly anticipate, was that 7 months later, those very people who had turned her away would be the ones knocking. Desperate, embarrassed, and crying. And what she would say to them would change the balance of power in her life. Forever. Emily had always been the daughter who blended into the wallpaper. Not by choice, but by design. From the earliest age, she had learned to earn love in silence, to fold laundry without being asked, to clean up her sister's tantrums without complaint, to offer her own allowance to replace a broken vase her father had blamed on Christine. It had always been like that. Christine, the elder daughter, the wild one, was chaos wrapped in ribbons. She was magnetic, volatile, brilliant when she wanted to be, cruel when she needed to be. Her moods ruled the house. And her mistakes were often softened by their parents with well-practiced excuses. "She's just passionate," Margaret would say. "She's sensitive, misunderstood," Robert would add. "But Emily," they'd conclude, "Emily is easy, she understands." It was not a compliment. It was an assignment. A quiet command to remain small, to require less. By the time Emily turned 15, Christine had been caught stealing from a department store, failed 2 semesters, and been suspended for fighting. The family responded with therapy appointments, extended curfews, a new car for motivation. When Emily earned a scholarship, no one showed up to the awards banquet. She remembered that night clearly. Her counselor had handed her the certificate and said, "You've carried a lot, Emily. I hope someone tells you how proud they are." No one did. She went home and placed the certificate on the kitchen counter, where it remained for 3 days before disappearing. Never acknowledged, never mentioned again. Years passed. Christine burned through 3 engagements and a DUI. Still, she was seated at the head of the table every holiday. Still, her stories dominated conversations. Still, their mother referred to her as our brilliant girl who's just trying to find her way. When Emily married quietly in her mid-20s, it was a courthouse ceremony. Margaret wore beige and didn't smile in the photos. Robert asked once, "Are you sure this is what you want?" It wasn't love that they doubted. It was Emily. As though she had no right to joy. As though choosing happiness without fanfare was somehow suspicious. Her marriage lasted 6 years. Her husband, gentle at first, had grown resentful and withdrawn after the birth of their second child. He left one morning without warning, leaving a note that read, "You're too self-sufficient. I never felt needed." Emily stared at those words for an hour. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the abandonment or the bitter irony of it. She had been taught all her life to need less, to ask for nothing, to endure without burdening anyone. And yet in the end, that quiet strength had made her unlovable. After the divorce, she returned to work, started tutoring online at night, and taught herself to sew clothes to save on expenses. Her apartment was small but clean, full of light and paper snowflakes that her boys had made from printer sheets. She painted a tiny mural in the corner of their bedroom, a tree with stars growing from its branches. They called it the Wish Tree. And even then, through exhaustion, through the solitude, she never asked her parents for help. Not when Lucas was hospitalized for pneumonia, not when she couldn't afford the heating bill and spent 3 nights sleeping on the couch with both boys under one blanket. Not when her ex-husband stopped sending child support and changed numbers. Still, they never called. She sent photos at Christmas. She delivered handmade gifts on birthdays. She offered respect. She sent updates, carefully phrased to sound like everything was just fine. She never let them see her fall. And yet, despite this dignity, they had still managed to shut the door on her that Christmas Eve. Without malice, perhaps, but with cold certainty. "You are not a priority." That was the message. And yet something in Emily refused to fully collapse. She was not vindictive, but she had begun to awaken. She no longer wished to be seen. She wanted to be free. There was a shift in how she moved, a change in how she spoke to the boys. Slower, more deliberate. She no longer tried to fill silences with apologies. She no longer justified her absence in group chats with cousins. She no longer craved invitation. She understood, finally, that the love she had begged for had never existed in the form she imagined. It had been conditional, fragile, dependent on her ability to remain invisible. But something else was about to happen. Something that would test the limits of her forgiveness. Because 7 months after that silent, snowy Christmas, the phone rang. And it was her mother. But the voice Emily heard was not the same. It was tremulous, panicked, on the edge of something. And the words that followed, they were the last thing Emily expected from the woman who had once turned her children away from the family table. It was a Sunday afternoon in late July, the kind of humid stillness that made the curtains cling to the windows and time feel suspended. Emily was folding laundry while Ben and Lucas played with blocks on the floor, building a miniature version of a city they would never be able to visit, at least not yet. The phone rang. Not the familiar soft chime of a contact, but a generic ringtone. An unknown number. Emily hesitated. There was a particular kind of silence that entered the room when the past called. It was not dramatic, but exact. It filled every corner. She answered. At first there was only the faint hum of a distant breath, and then a voice, her mother's, fractured and breathless, as though she had just run up a long, invisible hill. "Emily, please, please don't hang up." Emily remained still. Even the children noticed the change in the air and looked up at her, curious, uncertain. Her mother continued, each word like walking barefoot over glass. "Your father's hours have been cut. Christine, she's in trouble again. And the mortgage?" She broke off. Then, "We need your help." 3 words, so short, so common. But for a woman who once turned her grandchildren away from a Christmas table, they carried the weight of a fallen cathedral. Emily did not interrupt. "We know you've been managing things well. You're organized, stable. You've always been the responsible one." There it was again, disguised as praise, responsibility as burden, steadiness as exploitation. The same traits for which she was once ignored were now the very qualities being summoned, used. Margaret's voice trembled. "We're not asking out of entitlement. We didn't know who else to turn to." Emily's hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the intensity of all that went unsaid. She walked into the hallway, away from the boys, and closed the door gently behind her. Then she spoke. Calmly. Deliberately. "I remember standing on your porch last December," she said, her voice low but steady. "It was snowing. My children were carrying presents they wrapped themselves." A pause. "You opened the door and looked through us." Her mother tried to respond, but Emily continued. "You had 4 plates on the table, Mother. 4, not 6. You had counted, carefully, intentionally. And when I asked about it, you didn't even lie. You said you were tired, that the house was full." Another pause, heavier now. "Do you remember what Dad said?" Silence. Emily answered her own question. "He said we didn't need more to carry that night." She let the words settle. "I carried them," she said. "I have carried them every day since, through unpaid bills, missed holidays, fevers in the middle of the night, birthdays with cupcakes instead of cakes. And not once, did I ask you for anything." Now her voice softened, not from gentleness, but resolve. "And today you call. You call because you need me." There was a muffled sob on the other end. Margaret whispered, "We made a mistake." Emily's answer was swift. "No, you made a decision." Margaret's breath caught. "You decided I was expendable. You decided your comfort mattered more than your daughter's dignity. You decided that showing up for Christine's chaos was more valuable than acknowledging my quiet suffering." Her mother's voice cracked. "Emily, please. He's too proud to call himself. But he's hurting. We're scared." Emily looked at the photo on the wall across from her. Ben asleep on her lap, Lucas holding her hand with one of his missing teeth shining through a grin. She thought of the nights she cried into a towel so they wouldn't hear. The dinners stretched thin. The days she sat in silence while the world rewarded louder people with softer landings. Then she said, in a tone both final and unexpectedly kind, "You taught me to survive without you, and now I've learned." The phone was silent. She did not hang up. She simply waited, long enough for her mother to feel the full shape of the moment, and then placed the phone on the counter. No more words were spoken. That night, she blocked the number, not out of cruelty, but closure. She wasn't angry. She was awake. And yet, what Emily could not know, what no one could know, was that her father would not let it end there. Because 3 days later, he would send her a message, not an apology, something else. Something that would cut deeper than any absence ever had. 3 days after the call ended, after Emily had spoken the words she never thought she would be brave enough to say. The house returned to its usual rhythm. Morning routines, toast with jam, lunches packed in plastic containers, the quiet hum of normality. But something inside her had shifted. It wasn't visible. It wasn't something her boys could notice. But it was there, in her stillness, in the way she sat with her coffee a little longer in the morning, in how she no longer rehearsed conversations in her head, hoping to someday be understood. She had said what she needed to say, and that should have been the end of it. Until the message came. It arrived mid-afternoon just as Emily was preparing lesson plans for her online class. The notification flashed briefly on her screen. Dad, 2:14 p.m. She stared at it. She hadn't seen his name appear on her phone in months, perhaps longer. For a moment, she considered not opening it. But there was a gravity to that name, a pull. Not of longing, but of caution, like stepping near a cliff's edge. She clicked. The message was short. You've made your point. We always knew you'd end up bitter. Christine was flawed, but at least she knew how to love. You push everyone away, then act like the victim. Don't pretend your life is so noble. You're just loud about your silence. Emily read the words once, then again. There was no greeting, no context, no signature, only a deliberate act of dismissal. A message designed not to open a door, but to burn it shut. She sat in silence, as if the room itself had dropped a degree. The words did not shout. They didn't need to. Their cruelty was precise. You're just loud about your silence. It was the kind of phrase that wasn't careless. It had been chosen, crafted. A knife concealed in grammar. For years, she had wondered whether her father's distance was simply discomfort, a generational inability to express emotion. She had given him the benefit of every doubt. Maybe he didn't know how to show love. Maybe his silence was fear. Maybe he was waiting for her to reach out. But this message ended the mythology. He hadn't been confused. He had been exact. He had watched her carry the family's emotional weight, observed her endure abandonment, and when she dared to speak, not scream, not rage, but simply state her truth, he called it bitterness. Christine, the beloved chaos, was still the golden child, because Christine had never challenged them. Emily did, and for that, she was discarded. She locked her phone and set it face down. Across the room, Ben was humming to himself while coloring on the floor, a green crayon in one hand, his tongue poking out in concentration. Lucas sat nearby, building a tower from old blocks, occasionally glancing at his mother, sensing something, but knowing enough not to ask. They had inherited her silence. But Emily swore they would never inherit her invisibility. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Emily stood at the window and watched the darkness pull over the street like a blanket. She wasn't crying, not anymore. She had crossed a threshold where tears no longer reached. Instead, she retrieved an old cardboard box from the top of the hallway closet, the one that held leftover Christmas decorations, tangled lights, and 2 handmade ornaments the boys had painted the year they were turned away. She placed her phone inside it. Next to it, she added the message, screen captured and printed, not for revenge, not for proof, but as a marker of closure, the final page in a long chapter. She resealed the box and placed it in the back of the closet again, not hidden, but not on display. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and did something she hadn't done in years. She made a list. A list of things that would never happen again. No more explanations to people who had already chosen not to understand her. No more invitations to those who declined her when she had the least. No more mistaking duty for love. No more wondering if her worth needed permission. She wrote until the pen ran out of ink, and as she looked over the final line, she realized something profound. Her story had not been one of rejection, but of redirection. The people who walked away were never meant to walk with her, and yet there remained one thread of tension unresolved: the boys. One of them, sooner than she expected, would ask a question, and when he did, Emily would be forced to choose. Would she protect their image of family, or tell them the truth? Autumn arrived quietly, without permission. The air in Cincinnati sharpened. The trees flared with impossible reds and golds before surrendering their leaves. The wind changed, and so did Emily. It had been 3 months since the message from her father. 3 months since she had placed that phone and those words into the cardboard box marked Seasonal, Misk, and set it in the back of her closet. She had not spoken to her parents since. No calls came, no texts, no second attempts. The silence was complete now, but it no longer hurt. It simply existed, like the space left by a once familiar piece of furniture removed from a room. You stumble at first, reaching for something that is no longer there, but then you walk differently. Emily did. She stood straighter. She spoke more slowly. She no longer narrated her choices in her head as though waiting for someone else's approval. But healing does not come without cost, and sometimes the questions arrive when you least expect them. It was a Thursday evening in late October. The boys had returned from school and were helping her decorate for Halloween. Paper ghosts, string lights, a pumpkin too large for their small kitchen table. As she sorted through the decorations, Lucas, older, observant, quiet like his mother, found a crumpled gift tag inside a box. It was faded, the ink smudged, but still legible. To Grandma, from Lucas, I made it myself. He held it in his hands for a long time, then turned to her and asked the question she had rehearsed in her mind 100 different ways, never knowing when it would come. Why don't we see them anymore? Emily felt the world pause. Ben was still humming to himself nearby, oblivious. But Lucas looked at her with the full seriousness of a child who has begun to notice the fractures in the world and wants to understand which ones are safe to touch. She sat down. Not because she was afraid, but because truth should always be delivered at eye level. She chose her words slowly. There are people in our lives who love us, but don't always know how to show it, she began. And sometimes, when someone doesn't understand how to love gently, they hurt the people closest to them, without even meaning to. Lucas nodded slightly, though his eyes remained fixed on hers. And when that happens, she continued, we have to decide if we want to keep trying to be seen by someone who refuses to look at us, or if we want to use that energy to build something better, something kinder, with the people who are right here, already loving us the way we deserve. He was quiet. Then he asked, do you still love them? A long breath. I don't know, she said honestly. I think I used to love the version of them I hoped they would become. He accepted the answer with the peculiar grace children have when offered honesty instead of illusion. Later that night, when the boys had gone to bed, Emily sat with her journal, the same one where she had written lists months before. But tonight, there were no lists. Just one sentence. I am no longer trying to win love from people committed to misunderstanding me. She closed the book. Thanksgiving came. Then Christmas again. This year, Emily took the boys on a road trip to Asheville. They stayed in a small cabin with a fireplace and made popcorn on the stove. They didn't have a tree, so they painted pine cones and taped them to the wall in the shape of one. And on Christmas morning, Ben looked at her, still in his pajamas, and said, "This is the best Christmas ever." She smiled and kissed his forehead, but something lingered behind her eyes. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep beneath the soft hum of snow tapping the cabin roof, Emily stepped outside into the dark. The stars above her were distant, indifferent, beautiful. She thought of her father, of the message, of the decades she had spent trying to be small enough, quiet enough, good enough. And then she thought of her sons. And something inside her shifted again. Not an ending, not even forgiveness, but a release. She whispered into the cold, "I break the chain." No one heard her. But that was the point. Some declarations are not made for others. They are made for the self in the quiet, when the soul is finally ready to listen. And yet, as winter passed and spring approached, an envelope would one day arrive at her door. No return address, no name. Only her own, handwritten in a script she hadn't seen in years. Inside it, a photograph. Old. Familiar. Her at age 5, sitting on her father's shoulders, laughing. On the back, a single line. "There are things I wish I had said." And Emily, standing at her front door, held the photo for a long time. Not crying, not smiling, just breathing. Because sometimes the past doesn't want to return. It only wants to be acknowledged. And sometimes, even in the quietest lives, a new story is waiting to begin.